It was a bold and unexpected move. President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso decided to take direct action. After receiving shocking evidence against former U.S. President Barack Obama, the information suggested that USAID had been used as a cover to secretly fund terror operations across parts of Africa. The situation sparked a political storm, raising urgent questions. What proof existed? Who was truly involved? And what might happen next that could change everything? It started on a quiet Monday morning in Ouagadougou. President Ibrahim had just finished his usual security briefing when someone handed him a sealed black envelope. There was no stamp or sender's name, just 3 words written in red ink: USAID, Africa Blood. He opened it slowly and found classified documents inside. There were satellite images, intercepted emails, and records of money transfers connecting certain USAID operations to armed groups attacking innocent communities. Even more disturbing, some of these documents carried digital signatures linked to former U.S. officials, including members of Barack Obama's Global Foundation team. President Ibrahim froze for a moment. His hands shook, and he struggled to catch his breath. Could this really be true? For years, villagers had spoken of mysterious white trucks that handed out food before disappearing, and soon after, rebels would arrive. Now, there was evidence. He stood up, his voice calm but cold, and ordered his team to call the intelligence chief. "We move now before they hide everything," he said. That night, the presidential compound remained dark. No media were informed, no statements made, but something deep had shifted. The hidden truth had started to surface, and it would change everything. By dawn, President Ibrahim launched a covert operation named Operation Chingwa. It was a 72-hour mission to uncover how deeply foreign groups had infiltrated under the mask of aid. He trusted no outsiders, so he relied only on a small team of loyal intelligence officers and 3 young analysts, all local, all driven by the search for truth. The team spread out. Some inspected abandoned USAID field offices, others quietly entered NGO warehouses. A third group hacked into old satellite hubs outside the capital. What they discovered was heartbreaking. There were records of aid that was never delivered, expired vaccines dumped in poor communities, and private memos from contractors mocking how easily they could soften resistance zones. But it was a single handwritten note that struck hardest. It read, "Phase 3, displace, starve, arm." On the back was a fading signature, "Approved." Though, the team stared at that note for a long time, wondering whether Barack Obama had truly known, or if someone had used his name. President Ibrahim didn't rush to blame. He told his team to investigate first, then speak. But his eyes were red, not from anger, but from deep betrayal. Africa had trusted handshakes and kind words for years. Now, it seemed those gestures had sharp claws. President Ibrahim quietly visited the ghost village of Kauhabu, once peaceful. It was now empty and destroyed. No cameras, no speeches, just the quiet pain of what he saw: burnt houses, dry wells, torn clothes of children. He met the only elder left, Fatuma, whose voice trembled as she spoke. She said men had come as helpers, handed out rice, took names, and smiled. But a few days later, armed rebels arrived. They burned crops, killed the fathers, and took the young boys, including her only grandson. When the team showed Fatuma photos from the files, she pointed to a logo she recognized, USAID, and to a man wearing sunglasses. She remembered him as one of the visitors who had promised help. That man was later identified as a contractor connected to secret counterinsurgency programs. President Ibrahim knelt beside her, holding her hand. In his other hand, he clutched the picture of her grandson. A tear slid down his cheek, not just for Fatuma, but for every African child stolen by lies disguised as aid. The countdown had begun. The truth was finally on the move. Meanwhile, in a small shelter near Kaya, a barefoot boy named Asuf stumbled into a health outpost. Thin and frightened, he could barely speak. A nurse gently offered him water, and a new chapter of this investigation was about to unfold. As the boy drank the water, he pulled a small, folded paper from the pocket of his torn shorts. The The paper was crumpled, wet, and stained with dirt. Inside were some coordinates and a chilling message written in a child's shaky handwriting. "They took us here. We dig holes. We cry. They say we are helping America." The nurse froze for a moment. Without wasting time, she contacted the presidential tip line set up under Operation Chingle. Within hours, President Ibrahim Traoré's special unit arrived. At the scene by helicopter, the boy, named Ijaf, pointed toward the hills near the Palma forest. The team followed his lead. What they found there shook their hearts. A shallow grave, then another, and another. They saw tiny bones, torn shirts, and rusty shovels scattered around. President Ibrahim stood in silence, watching as his men gently covered the graves with the flag of Burkina Faso. His voice was low and filled with sorrow as he whispered, "They were just children." The wind howled through the trees, and to them, it sounded like the cries of the earth itself. Cries that demanded justice, cries that woke lands. Back in Ouagadougou, while young Ijaf received treatment, the team worked around the clock analyzing the coordinates and combing through encrypted data from seized USAID servers. Then came the breakthrough. A young analyst named Miriam decrypted a voice note. It had been recorded accidentally by a satellite phone used by a foreign contractor. The clip was short, only 30 seconds. But it made President Ibrahim stop breathing. The voice said, "Ensure phase for starts in Burkina Faso by next week. If we can keep those regions unstable, the funding pipeline stays active." Obama's cover through the foundation still holds. Silence filled the war room. The voice matched that of a known CIA field operative who had been flagged before for working on development projects in Mali, Niger, and Chad. President Ibrahim clenched his fist. It wasn't just infiltration. They were creating chaos on purpose, using African children as pawns. He told Miriam to translate the recording into French and send it to the African Union. He ordered the team to leak it to the press. "The world must hear this," he said. The fire had begun. The mask of fake aid was falling apart. That same night, an intelligence briefing landed on President Ibrahim's desk. The report revealed how millions of dollars had been funneled from USAID subcontractors through a shell company in the Caribbean, then donated to a non-profit branch of the Obama Foundation, a group labeled Global Youth Development. But the youth they were developing were being turned into armed fighters. Satellite images confirmed that so-called climate training centers in northern Benin and eastern Burkina Faso were actually weapons depots. Among those forced into this nightmare was Fatuma's grandson from Kabu, alive, but changed, used. When Ibrahim saw the boy's photo, he sat down slowly, his eyes filled with tears. He said softly, "They turned our future into soldiers, using our trust and our pain." When his generals asked what to do next, Ibrahim gave one clear order: "We will speak the truth, loud, without fear." The following morning, President Ibrahim called a press conference. The world watched as cameras rolled. He didn't throw around careless accusations. Instead, he showed evidence, names, accounts, pictures. Then he said a sentence that echoed across continents: "If aid means killing our children, then let the aid stop today." The room fell silent. Africa had found its lion. Far away, in a quiet village near Foden Gorma, a mother named Awa sat outside her small hut. Her eldest son, Hamidou, had left a year ago for what they promised was a youth program supported by foreign aid workers. They told her he'd get food, education, and a better future. She never saw him again. All she had left was a letter he had written. "Mama, they said I'll be a hero, but I'm scared. We hold guns. We chant words I don't understand." When Awa saw President Ibrahim on national television, speaking of children turned into fighters by false aid, her heart broke. She walked 6 hours to the nearest military post and showed them her son's letter. The soldiers bowed their heads in silence. One of them whispered, "She is not alone." The soldiers connected her to a growing database. There were many mothers, like Awa, mothers whose children had been stolen by lies. When Ibrahim later read Hamidou's letter, his voice cracked with pain. He understood. This was not just a scandal. President Ibrahim Traoré stood before his people and declared that this was a wound in the soul of Africa. His promise was clear: "We will bring back every son, or we will die trying." Far away, in a dimly lit back room in Niamey, Niger, a secret meeting took place. Men in suits, some African, some foreign, gathered around a table. They exchanged documents and stared at a map covered with red X's marking areas in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Chad. One man, speaking with a soft American accent, said that the stabilization increased dependence and kept contracts flowing. Another, older and balding, muttered that President Traoré was becoming a problem. What they didn't know was that a young, quiet waiter serving them was actually an undercover Burkina Faso intelligence officer. He recorded everything. By morning, the footage was in President Traoré's hands. His jaw tightened as he watched it. Proof of far-back plots, bribed African officials, coded payments to the Obama-linked Global Youth Fund, and worse, an order to neutralize him quietly. But Ibrahim did not flinch. He turned to his generals and said they would not hide. Let them come. We are not the hunted. We are the hunters now. For the first time in years, Africa had a leader who refused to bow. The truth wasn't leaking anymore. It was exploding. In a dusty village near Diaga, children had stopped attending school. There were whispers of strange smells in the building, and lights flickering in the basement at night. Acting on a tip, President Traoré ordered a quiet investigation. What his soldiers found shot them. Behind a locked door beneath the school, there was a hidden cell. Bare floors, chains, stained mattresses. 12 children, malnourished and frozen in fear, had been trafficked through fake aid programs and kept there like property. On the walls, names had been scratched by desperate little fingers hoping not to be forgotten. When President Traoré arrived, the village gathered. Mothers collapsed in tears as their missing children were brought out, weak but alive. The president knelt before them. No cameras, no speech, just a father's tears falling onto the dirt. He asked for forgiveness for not seeing the truth sooner. The footage hadn't been released yet, but it was coming, and it would break hearts around the world. The school was shut down, the children were taken to safety, and the message was clear: aid without love is just another kind of war. As the news of the child prison and USAID connections spread, the people expected the United Nations to act. But the UN said nothing. No investigations, no emergency meetings, just quiet calls urging President Traoré to calm down and consider diplomacy. But Ibrahim stood firm. He held up a blood-stained school uniform and declared that this was not diplomacy. This was evil hiding behind a flag. In Newark, African diplomats wept in private meetings after seeing the evidence. One of them said they had sold Africa's children for politics. Back in Ouagadougou, thousands marched in the streets. Women held signs that read, "Our children are not experiments." Drums echoed, mothers wept, and in the middle of the crowd walked President Traoré, without guards, holding a megaphone. He told them, "We will never again stay silent for the sake of peace. If that peace is soaked in our people's blood." The West remained silent until a whistleblower finally broke through. Jacob Freeman, once praised as a humanitarian hero, reappeared after years of hiding. He leaked thousands of documents, emails, contracts, budgets, coordinates. One email from 2018 instructed aid to be funneled through proxies to terror-linked camps and ordered these camps to be labeled as youth training programs. Another email named Obama's former foundation as a development partner. The leaks exploded on social media. Justice for Burkina trended across Africa. Journalists called for interviews, but President Traoré had already acted. He suspended every foreign NGO tied to the corruption. Some Western leaders called his move dangerous. But Ibrahim said, "What's dangerous is pretending to feed people while training children to shoot their brothers." The truth could no longer be buried, not under aid, not under diplomacy. And the people felt something they hadn't felt in decades: pride. On the 5th day of the unfolding crisis, the U.S. Embassy in Accra sent an urgent message to Ouagadougou. Former President Barack Obama wanted to speak directly with President Traoré. The room fell silent. Advisors exchanged nervous looks, but Traoré didn't pause. He said there was no need. Obama had years to speak while the people of Africa were dying. Now, it was time for him to listen. Instead of a private call, Traoré sent a public message. He invited Obama to come to Burkina Faso if his hands were clean, to sit with the mothers, to drink their tears, and to look them in the eyes. The message spread rapidly. In Washington, some called it disrespectful, but across Africa, millions shared the video, adding the words, "Finally, someone speaks." For us died in a small village in Togo. An elderly grandmother whispered that Ibrahim was not just a president, he was their voice. Young people in Senegal, Congo, and Kenya painted murals of Traoré holding a child in one arm and a flag in the other. The world began to see what Traoré truly stood for: truth, honor, and Africa. But tension kept building as everyone sensed that the next step might unleash a storm no one could stop. The seventh day began heavy across Africa. In cities and villages, streets filled with chants, drums, and protest signs. In Nairobi, students dressed in black and marched with candles. In Mali, a young boy stood on a box, shouting, "We are not your puppets." But what took the world by surprise was what happened in America. Protesters gathered outside the Obama Foundation headquarters in Chicago. Many were African immigrants, some in tears. One woman held a photo of her brother who had been killed in a terror attack in Niger. She shouted, "You gave them guns," and called it aid. Soon, CNN picked up the story. MSNBC followed. Fox News aired it too. And suddenly, Obama, once a global hero, faced hard questions he'd never heard before. Did your administration know USAID was funding violent groups in Africa? Obama said nothing at first. Later, his office released a short statement denying the claims and insisting on his commitment to global peace. But by then, the world was no longer convinced. There had been too many graves. Too many secrets died in Ouagadougou. Traoré prepared the move that would turn the fire into an explosion. An open court hearing broadcast to the world. The national stadium, usually filled with music, became a courtroom. Thousands came. Millions watched online. It was called the People's Tribunal. Traoré stood at the center, not as a judge, but as a servant of the people. Survivors came forward to speak. A girl of 17 stepped to the microphone. She said she was kidnapped at 13. The captors told her they were helping, that the food came from America. But then, they forced her to carry a gun. She broke down in tears. The crowd wept with her. An old man spoke next, describing how his village was destroyed. His words trailed off as grief overwhelmed him. Finally, Traoré held up two flags. One was Burkina Faso's. The other was an American flag stained with blood, recovered from a destroyed terror camp. He declared, "We're not against a country. We are against lies hidden behind kindness." The world watched, shaken. No African leader had ever done this before. Not so raw, not so honest. And the next day, something happened that no one expected. A high-ranking American diplomat defected. He flew straight to Burkina Faso. His name was Ambassador Alan Reed. He had served across Africa for 30 years under 3 U.S. presidents. But he admitted he had never seen anything like this. When Alan landed, protected by Burkina Faso forces, he looked pale, his hands trembling. Traoré met him privately for an hour. Then Alan walked into the stadium, faced the cameras, and spoke. He said he had served his country faithfully, but the things he had witnessed and signed haunted him. Alan held up a folder. Inside were copies of secret agreements, deals between USAID, private American security contractors, and fake NGOs. He explained that he had been told it was all for peace building, but the truth, he said, was different. It was for chaos. Always chaos. Alan began to cry. The crowd grew silent, watching as a young boy, barefoot, dusty, and wearing a torn shirt, walked up and hugged the trembling diplomat. The people wept together. Traoré stood still, his gaze lifted to the sky, as if speaking to the souls of those who had been lost. This, he declared, was no longer just about Burkina Faso. It was about every African soul that had been used, deceived, and discarded. What happened next sent shockwaves through the U.S. Congress and triggered a storm no one had seen coming. At 3:47 a.m., President Traoré received a confidential letter at the presidential palace, marked with red ink for his eyes only. It came from an American soldier still serving in Africa. Inside the envelope were dozens of photos, videos, coordinates, and signed documents. One photo showed a terrorist camp in northern Burkina Faso, with 2 USAID staff members laughing beside armed men. Another showed a warehouse full of weapons, not stolen, but shipped directly from a U.S. military base in Djibouti, falsely labeled as humanitarian supplies. Traoré's hands shook as he read. He called his team together and ordered an emergency press conference. Before dawn, his face appeared on screens across Africa. He told the people the truth was no longer hidden. This wasn't a war of bullets. It was a war of betrayal. Raising the soldier's letter, he stared into the camera and said, "You used our pain, but now we will use our voice." A wave of silence swept across the continent, and that stillness. He read aloud, one heartbreaking line from the letter. "I am sorry. I didn't sign up to murder Africa." Later that day, something unexpected happened in a refugee camp near Kaya. An 8-year-old boy named Adama climbed onto a rock and shouted, "President Traoré, we love you." He had no shoes, no parents, only hope. A journalist captured the moment. The video spread like wildfire across Africa. People began writing "Je suis Traoré," "I am Traoré" on walls, shirts, and even in the sand. In New York, UN diplomats avoided reporters. The U.S. ambassador was recalled, and Obama, still silent, now seemed guilty by the very silence. That night, Traoré returned to the stadium. His speech was brief. He said that Adama, though he had lost everything, still believed, and that was the true power of Africa. He turned to the boy, standing beside him trembling, and knelt to tie the boy's broken sandals with his own hands. The crowd wept. Around the world, viewers did too, even in America. People began to wonder aloud if Traoré was the kind of leader the world truly needed. 1 week, one truth, one storm that changed everything. President Traoré held a final press briefing. There were no walls, no guards, just him and his people. He shared the last pieces of evidence, proof of Obama's silent ties to the USAID arms pipeline, whistleblower testimonies, timelines, and payment records. But he did not call for revenge. He called for rebirth. Traoré warned that answering hate with hate would only fulfill the enemy's plan. But if they built, taught, and rose, they would break the system of oppression. Raising his hand, he declared, "Africa will no longer beg. We are standing up." That same day, 10 African nations suspended USAID operations. Obama's legacy shook, but the soul of Africa rose. Children were named Ibrahim. A new anthem was written in Burkina Faso, and Adama, the boy who shouted from the rock, was adopted by a school. His education funded by donations from around the world. One man's courage had moved mountains. As the sun set, the sky burned orange, and for the first time in a long time, people smiled, not because they felt safe, but because they felt strong. Now it's your turn. If this story touched your heart, if you cried, if you felt Africa's pain and Traoré's courage, don't scroll away. Like this video so it can reach more hearts. Comment below. Africa will rise if you believe in a new future. Subscribe for more untold stories like this. And remember, one voice can shape the world. Let it be yours.